Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Mile Higher Podcast, episode 298. And as you can tell, this one's a little different since I am introing, and unfortunately, Josh is not sitting besides me.
I am Josh.
Yeah, unfortunately, Josh has quit the show, so that's the end of that.
And we were contractually obligated to keep going, so
it's very unfortunate.
We're just going to roll with it.
No, but actually, Josh is here. He will be piping in.
I am here, guys. What are you talking about?
You sound...
He's barely here. Half of Josh is here. Poor Josh is a little sick. He has lost his voice. I mean, it's still kind of there, but it's barely hanging on. And he has a big project coming up tomorrow that he needs to save his voice for. So I have made the decision that it is best he limits his vocalizations today. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So rest the chords.
But I'm still here, and I want to jump in, but literally yesterday, or actually day before yesterday, I lost my voice in the middle of a Lights Out episode, and it was with a guest too, and that was very sad.
Yeah.
I got really sick on Saturday, and my throat got attacked by a demon, I think. So trying to exercise it. But I'm here, and I'm gonna put my 2 cents in. But I know you guys don't want to hear me like this the whole time. So.
Yeah, it's pretty rough. So fortunately, we do have our lovely producer, Janelle, here to take over for Josh today.
Yes, thanks for having me. I'm really excited. I've never co-hosted a Mile Higher episode, I don't think ever.
No, I don't think you have, which is crazy.
Been in the background since 2018, baby. But
I can't believe we've never had a time where we've needed you.
I can't think. I've been before I even worked here, was like a guest on Mile Higher. We were back in the day when we were like
in the basement.
Yeah, in the basement, really just living on vibes.
And before we jump in, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Janelle and I's podcast, The Sesh. If you didn't know, we also host a show together, and it is nothing like Mile Higher. It is very laid back, conversational, current events and commentary.
Pop
and
culture.
A
lot of laugh.
Goofing around.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of
games, fun. And we did that to kind of balance out our other shows. It's supposed to be a place to just chillax most of the time. Although we do get into some heavier topics sometimes. But yeah, check that out. That'll be linked below. This is episode 298, which means we're almost to 300, guys.
Crazy.
Pretty insane. But for this episode, we do have a case that is right here in our own backyard in Colorado. It's one that we've had our eyes on for a while. We've really wanted to talk about it because it is so eerie. It's unexplained. We're talking about the heartbreaking disappearance and death of Joshua Maddux. This case is truly bizarre, super frustrating, and it's going to leave you with more questions than answers, unfortunately. There are a few theories as to what could have happened here, but it's unsolved to this day.
Super, super strange details of this. And I'm excited to hear what everyone thinks after we give all the information. And
me too. I'm curious to hear what our audience... I have a feeling I know where you guys are going to lean for sure. In my opinion, it's sort of obvious, but I don't know. I guess no one truly knows. But there's a lot of evidence that points to one specific person, which we will explain.
Definitely.
So before we get into the disappearance of Joshua Maddux and explain how all of this unfolds, I want to spend some time just talking about who he was as a person, because from what we have found researching this case, he seems like just an incredible soul. Someone that I wish I could have met. He just seems so chill, so kind, so deep.
So interesting.
Yeah.
Had so many cool hobbies and goals in life.
Joshua Vernon Maddux was born on March 9th, 1990 to Michael Albert and Roberta Lee Schmer. Josh was the fourth child and youngest son, and he really looked up to his two older sisters, Catherine Michelle, who goes by Kate, and also his sister, Ruth Marie. But more than anyone, Josh truly looked up to his older brother, Zachary, who was born 2 years earlier in 1988. And through Zachary, Josh discovered his love for music, reading, and maintaining and building a creative side. Their family lived in Woodland Park, Colorado, which is a historic Western town outside of Colorado Springs. I actually just went there for the first time a couple weeks ago. We only went for dinner, so I didn't get to see much of it, but I definitely want to see more of it, although I have heard mixed things.
Yeah.
I've heard that it can also be somewhat unsafe.
Yeah, one of our coworkers was talking about how he was like, yeah, no one trusts anyone there. It's kind of sketchy. I've never been. I mean, it looks really pretty.
Yeah, I've always heard good things about it because another one of our coworkers has spent a lot of time there, and he's always raved about it.
That's true.
I don't know. Anyway, it's hidden within the mountains, and it is overlooked by many snow-capped summits, most notably Pikes Peak, absolutely beautiful. And the downtown district preserved many of the original buildings, and locals celebrate the history. Josh lived less than a mile away from the Thunderhead Ranch, which is an old gambling hall from the town's wilder past, you could say. And Josh loved the history surrounding him and the peace and solitude that he could find in the forest. He had numerous hiking trails from his front door, which was perfect because he truly loved the outdoors. He would take daily walks alone to clear his mind. And he was homeschooled for his first 2 grades, but he did enter the Woodland Park school district and made many friends. His sister said that Josh had a thoughtful, kind, and loving personality. His sister Ruth said, quote, "He was my best friend. He always inspired me to strive for greatness. Josh would tell me that no one should ever say anything bad about anyone else ever, and I tried to be more like him. Josh was one of the nicest people I have ever met, and I am very proud to be his sister." I thought that was super sweet. Josh often spent his days hiking, camping with friends, writing, or playing music. Music was definitely his greatest passion. When he learned a new instrument, he would bring it into town and make new friends, and they would write music together.
I wish I knew how to play an instrument.
I know, me too. Me too.
Especially multiple.
I know, that's true skill.
Seriously.
He also had many other skills, like we mentioned, writing. He actually had an ongoing comic strip going called Stickman and Smiley. I love the name of that. And he shared the stories with his friends and his family, and his sisters nicknamed him Dwa because of how he would say draw when he was a kid. While Josh loved his family and friends and did very well in school, he was definitely a free spirit. He always told his family that one day he would leave and go on a big adventure, and they always imagined that he would join a band and see the country. Regardless, though, Josh's family always thought that he would return from his adventure.
But sadly, in 2006, the Maddux family suffered their first tragedy. On June 2nd, Zachary committed suicide 2 weeks before he graduated from high school. And Zachary had sadly struggled with depression for most of his life, and in the end, he had no defense. Josh's father, Mike, said, quote, "It was a big shock for the family and a big shock for Josh. He thought very highly of his older brother. It's tough as a parent. You try to raise your kid, and when they're close to 18, you think they're pretty much grown up, but they're not. They still need a lot of help." Josh remained friendly and outgoing for his last 2 years in high school, but everyone could tell he and the family were still mourning. In his senior year, Josh joined a band with other students. They enjoyed making music together, but another member wanted to go on that big adventure with Josh. The morning of May 8th, 2008 was chilly, but bright and sunny. Josh was on track to graduate in a few weeks, and everything with the family seemed pretty normal. Josh told his family he was taking a morning hike alone and left from the front door, and the rest of the family went about their day. They didn't really think anything of it. It wasn't until Mike returned from work with no sign of Josh that he began to worry. But the other family members remained calm, saying that Josh likely met up with friends and was at one of their houses or camping in the woods. But the next day, there was still no sign of Josh. Mike said, quote, "I went to work one day and came home, and he wasn't there. The next day, he still didn't come home. I called all his friends, and nobody seen him. Nobody knew where he was." Josh's sisters remained hopeful. Kate would talk about Josh's plans to have great adventure someday and imagine that when Josh said he'd be gone for a while, he would mean he'd be gone for a few years. But Mike feared the worst. He had already lost one son and couldn't see another disappear into thin air. And on May 13th, Mike called the police. He had contacted all of Josh's friends and given him more than enough time to return home on his own. And as we'll see throughout this episode, the Woodland Park Police Department would almost always take the easiest way out, unfortunately, but something we see very often going through cases.
Yeah, not surprising at all.
Nope. They were quick to tell Mike that Josh had probably just run away.
And how many times do we hear this?
Seems like every week.
Mm-hmm. It literally, I would say every week for sure.
It's so ridiculous.
Yeah.
And of course, Josh was 18, so they're like, oh, well, there's no sign of foul play. He probably just left.
Yeah, which is like, why would you just assume that early on? And we know anyone who consumes true crime content, and just I think people in general know how important it is to act swiftly in the beginning of a disappearance. And you hear this way too much. You gotta wait. They've probably run away. It's so disappointing, but yeah, nothing new.
Nope. The cops said that they were unwilling to investigate at this point. And like Kendall said, the first 48 hours, they're the most important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's just so sad that, because you're over 18, there's no foul play. So therefore, what? You just got up and left?
Yeah.
Like, come on.
And it's like, what I don't understand about that is even if he did run away, he's still, I mean, he is 18, but he's very young and could absolutely be in danger even if he did run away. I don't understand that logic. But what the police did do was post missing persons notices around Woodland Park, nearby towns, and the internet. They included his distinguishing features, like how he had lost the tip of his right index finger during a bicycle accident when he was young. And one of the original missing persons notices said, quote, 18-year-old Joshua Maddux was last seen at his home on the morning of May 8th, 2008. When his mother returned home later that morning, Joshua was gone. 1 year prior, his brother died, and the two were very close, which pay attention to that sentence right there. He may now be bald. Anyone with information is asked to please contact the Woodland Park Police Department. And we can see from this posting that the cops weren't exactly putting their best foot forward, and they clearly incorrectly stated when Zachary had died, as it was 2 years before his disappearance, not 1. Joshua's sister, Kate, wrote to the Woodland Park News, quote, since Josh was 18, it has been reasonable to assume he may have decided to leave town and start a new life. As one of his 2 older sisters, I have always chosen to believe that this was the case. I have expected Josh to return home to my father's house at any time with a wife and small children so they can meet their grandparents and 2 aunts. Josh has always been known for his musical and literary talent, so maybe we could find him playing music with a band on tour or catch him writing successful novels under a pen name so that he could keep his preferred lifestyle of solitude in the woods. So I have a major fear about staying home alone. I avoid it at all costs. I hate when Josh leaves and I am stuck at the house by myself. He is shaking his head at me right now. But I have gotten a lot better. The real problem for me is at night. That's what really bothers me if I don't fall asleep with Josh in the bed. And this week specifically, Josh is going to be working on a project late into the night, most of the night. So I will be falling asleep. Hopefully I'll be falling asleep on my own. But I know that Simply Safe is going to make it so much better for me. And since we started using Simply Safe, it's been a lot easier for me to stay at home alone because I can check cameras around our house at any time, and I truly feel safe. Simply Safe was named Best Home Security Systems in 2024 by the U.S. News and World Report. Newsweek ranked it Best Customer Service in Home Security. They offer whole home protection, sensors to detect break-ins, fires, floods, and more. And they also have a variety of indoor and outdoor cameras. And like I said, that is the biggest thing for me, the fact that I can pull those up at any time. If I start getting the heebie-jeebies and I just need to take a look around, I can, check out any spot in my house. It's also really nice if you have pets or kids and you're trying to see where they are, spy on them. It really comes in handy for that as well. It's also backed by 24/7 professional monitoring for less than $1 a day, which is such a deal. There's also no contracts involved and a 60-day money-back guarantee. And one thing that's really cool about it is Simply Safe security systems can be customized for houses of all sizes, even apartments. Also, the name speaks for itself because it could not be more simple to install. You can actually do it yourself. Simply Safe has given us and many of our listeners that we've heard from real peace of mind. And I want you to have that too. So get 20% off any new Simply Safe system when you sign up for Fast Protect monitoring. Just visit simplysafe.com/milehigher. That's simply with an I, simplysafe.com/milehigher. There's no safe like Simply Safe. Now, while Joshua's sisters tried to stay hopeful, Mike always feared the worst. The family organized a search of the forest that Josh would walk alone in and would check campgrounds and homeless shelters in Colorado Springs for any sign of him. Now, part of the reason that Mike had feared the worst is considering what happened to his oldest son, Zachary. He was absolutely shocked when Zachary took his own life, but he couldn't help but feel that maybe Joshua had done the same. But without concrete evidence, Josh remained missing, and days turned to months, and then months sadly turned into years. Mike and Roberta also divorced in the years following Josh's disappearance. Roberta moved out while Mike actually remained in the family house, hopeful that if Josh were still alive, that he would be able to, find his home. Whenever a body was found near Woodland Park or Colorado Springs, the Maddux family obviously would brace themselves that maybe it would be Josh. But still, the years came and went, and Josh was never found. Kate said, quote, "We had hope of him being alive, and I feel like in a sense he continued to live on with us because we had so many dreams of what he could possibly be doing." Now, while the Maddux family remained in their home over the next several years, hoping that Josh would return, changes did occur in the neighborhood around them. Less than a mile away from the Maddux family home was the historic Thunderhead Ranch property, which we mentioned earlier.
Thunderhead was first built in 1935 by Woodland Park legend Big Bert Bergstrom. Big Bert was an icon of Woodland Park's wild days as he operated numerous illegal gambling operations throughout Teller County. Thunderhead was one of his most popular and largest operations. The many-acre property had a massive saloon in the center with good food, slot machines, and games of chance. The casino hosted performances by can-can dancers and a lot of booze. If a customer were a regular or trusted by Big Bert and his staff, they'd be led down a serpentine path at night to an isolated cabin on the property. In this little cabin, select guests would be treated to high-stakes games of craps, more slot machines, and sex workers employed by Big Bert himself. The gambling business was booming throughout Teller County for many decades. That was until 1954 when a reporter with the Denver Post snuck a camera into many of Bert's illegal casinos. After a photo of him holding a slot machine circulated, Bert went on trial and he was not found guilty, but almost all of his casinos had ended up being closed down. And Bert's lawyer, Martin Murphy, fell in love with the Thunderhead property and eventually bought it from Bert a few years later. The Murphy family adored the little cabin. While the saloon became a massive single-family ranch home, the little cabin always had a special place in their hearts. And eventually, ownership fell to Martin's son, Chuck, who operated one of the largest property development and renovation companies in Colorado Springs. Chuck's brother honeymooned in the little cabin and lived there for 27 years before he moved back to Colorado Springs. An expansion was added in 1990, which included a small room with a new chimney. And when the chimney was built, Chuck installed heavy iron mesh near the top to keep animals from entering in. The cabin became a rental, but was abandoned in 2005, and Chuck developed the surrounding acreage into 34 single-family homes. Chuck would only visit the cabin a few times after it was abandoned. There was really no need to make any constant checkups on it, and after 2008, Chuck noticed that the breakfast bar had been ripped from the wall and placed in front of the fireplace. Now, he didn't really overthink this. He thought, perhaps one of his staff did it to keep the critters out and just didn't tell him about it. But the cabin fell into further disrepair after this. It was in very bad condition. Chuck noticed a horrible stench, but assumed it was a dead raccoon trapped in the house. But around 2015, neighbors in the newly constructed homes complained about the cabin. And although it had sentimental value, Chuck knew that the cabin was too far gone to save. And in August of 2015, Chuck assembled a crew of workers to demolish the cabin.
So the crew started demolishing the cabin in the early morning hours of August 7th, and they moved an excavator onto the property and started with the chimney. Now, I'm sure you guys can tell where this is going. They did salvage the iron mesh grate and set it aside before entering the cabin, so we know that it was there. And once inside, contractors immediately smelled that awful stench that Chuck had noticed the past few years. And the workers thought whatever it was, that smell was coming from the fireplace. The workers moved the large breakfast bar away from the fireplace and looked up into the chimney. And what they found was absolutely horrific. Around 2:30 p.m., Chuck got a call from his workers saying that they had found a body stuck in the chimney. Now, before we go any further, trigger warning, this is a pretty graphic description of the body that was found. The body was in the fetal position and faced towards the ground. The body's knees were above its head, but the legs had dislodged due to the decomposition. Its hands were covering its face. The body was only wearing a thermal long-sleeve shirt and had been mummified. The legs had turned to bone. Now, because the contractors couldn't remove the body without the excavator and had already severely disturbed the scene through the demolition, this is possibly not the original position that the body was stuck in. We're not quite sure. Police moved quickly to take the body in for identification, but didn't do much in the way of investigation. They didn't ask for the pieces of the chimney that had been demolished, and more importantly, did not publicly reveal the folded clothes or nearly nude state that the body was found in. The discovery did make the local news, and reporter Bill Vogren actually called the Maddux family and also Pam White, whose son Lucas had been missing since 2004. He discussed the possibility that the body could belong to Josh with Mike Maddux, and Mike said, quote, Josh was such a wonderful boy, the kindest, nicest, brightest boy. He's been gone for 7 years now. Nobody's ever heard a word. I buried his older brother 2 years before, and it was so difficult on Josh. When his brother died, it pushed him over the edge. He went on and said, quote, at some point, you've got to accept the fact that Josh may never come home, and we may never know what happened to him. You can't live with an open wound. This destroyed our family. I'm grateful to have my 2 girls. Cases like the recent one, it reopens the wounds. Then I wait and see. You pray it's not your son, but you know it's somebody's son or daughter. And they cared about them and loved them and missed them like we do. And then on September 29th, the body was identified as Joshua Maddux through dental records. The Maddux family finally held a service for Josh in October of 2015. His sister Kate said, quote, the last 7 years have been really difficult and painful, but given the strange circumstances, it's like a miracle that we're having the opportunity to now give him a proper service and burial he deserves. He's not lost anymore. This isn't how we wanted him to come home, but he has come home, and that's important. Here's a clip of their family shortly after his remains were.
New information tonight about a body found in the chimney of an abandoned cabin in Woodland Park. The coroner's office confirms it is a man who disappeared 7 years ago. Construction crews found the remains of Joshua Maddux in the chimney as they were preparing to demolish it. Investigators say Maddux may have been trying to shimmy down that chimney and got stuck. Joshua was 18 when he disappeared. His family is devastated by the news, but grateful for closure.
I am relieved that we finally are able to give him a proper burial, and because that's what he deserves.
The death has been ruled an accident.
Now, the man who found Josh's body, Chuck Murphy, was kept out of the loop during the entire investigation. Police gave his crew the okay to continue demolition just a few days after Josh's body was found, and the cabin was entirely demolished by the end of September, only a few days after Josh was successfully ID'd.
Which I cannot believe that they
Seriously.
did this. Which, before we even get any further, Chuck said that he wouldn't have demolished the cabin if he knew how disorganized the police investigation was, which we'll explain more. So I don't want to put the blame on him for that. But just the fact that this was allowed is so unfortunate. I know, Josh, you have some thoughts on that.
Well, it's obvious that the police, just assumed that this was an accident, right? They didn't think about any other possibility, which is such a shame because they should always assume that foul play happened and rule that out prior to just assuming this was accidental.
Right.
Because there's possibility that evidence was destroyed, and it sounds like no forensic testing was done to see if anybody else was there with him.
Nope.
And I mean, what did you want when something like this happens in such a strange way? You would think you'd want to try to understand the full story, right? Like what actually happened to Joshua? How did he end up in this chimney? It's not like this happens every day.
Right.
So why not try to figure out how did he end up in the chimney and why?
Especially because the cabin has been there for years. Like, what is the rush to take this thing down all of a sudden?
I know, just days after he was ID'd.
Yeah.
I don't understand the rush. There should have been at least a couple of months to collect some evidence. I mean, it's just bizarre.
Yeah.
And it's really sad too, because
it's horrible
for it to be disturbed that way when it's been essentially his resting place all this time. I just think it's bizarre and sad.
It is.
I was going to say too, that what they should have done is a reconstruction, a crime scene reconstruction, and see, like, get a dummy that's the same size as Joshua and put it down that chimney and see, could he actually get down to the bottom in there and like actually figure out the physics behind this whole thing. Like, was he put in there? Did he climb in there himself?
Run different tests.
Yeah. Like figure out, which scenario makes the most sense. Cause it's like, oh, like what they think, oh, he just stumbled into the chimney and he got stuck and
that's what they want it to be.
Expired and, moving on.
I don't want to get like too conspiratorial, but it does weird me out that the police were just immediately like, all right, let's just basically get rid of this entire scene here and move along. Yeah. Why?
I know, that's what I wonder too.
What would be the harm in slowing down a little and actually
just a little
investigating this?
Yeah, no, It's really unfortunate. I'm curious how their family feels about that.
Now, the investigation did change districts halfway through from the Woodland Park Police Department to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and both departments shared the same coroner, Al Born, who conducted most of this investigation, and we'll talk more about Al in the rest of this. I have some thoughts. Born said Josh had suffered a, quote, accidental death and explicitly ruled out homicide. Now, according to Born, Josh had climbed onto the roof to reach the top of the chimney, then entered the chimney head first and attempted to shimmy down, quote, Santa Claus style, to get inside of the cabin.
Side note, how inappropriate is it for him to say
Santa Claus style? However, according to Born, Josh got stuck after he encountered a heatilator insert at the bottom of the chimney and couldn't get out. Born said that Josh likely did not starve to death, nor did he succumb to dehydration. He theorized that Josh likely died of hypothermia, as temperatures the night he disappeared dropped into the low 20s. Now, Josh's screams would most likely have not been heard by anyone that night because the cabin was relatively isolated and the sound would have been muffled because of his location inside the chimney. Born expressed his condolences for the family, but also said very strangely that it must have been a, quote, horrible death.
Just another inappropriate and unprofessional thing to say.
Why are you, like, what does that add?
Nothing.
Other than traumatize the family.
Yeah, just continue to state the obvious. Yeah.
I think it's offensive too because he insinuates that like Josh is somewhat of an idiot for like getting himself in this situation, like kind of passively puts the blame on him. Like, oh, you know,
shaming him.
Yeah, why was he so dumb that he would go down Santa Claus style down this chimney?
Yeah, it's the wording of it that makes you think.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm like, here's a guy that is plenty old to know better than to do that. So obviously you have to think about, well, if he didn't do that on his own accord, why else would he be in the chimney, right? Like, it's just the investigation skills of these guys is laughable.
I know, to not even come up with any type of reasoning behind why he would have done such an outlandish thing.
Look at alternate theories at all. Like, it doesn't make, they're just like, oh.
When Chuck learned of Born's findings, he was completely shocked. Not only did Born not mention the clothes folded inside the cabin, but he also skipped over the iron mesh that would have made it impossible to enter the chimney from the roof. And unknown to Chuck, ruling out homicide was also a product of police ineptitude. Tips had consistently rolled into the Woodland Park Police Department throughout the years, with people who claimed that a man had told them that he had killed Josh. But the police, of course, never followed up on any of these leads, because why would you, I guess? Makes no sense. It's so ridiculous.
Now, let's really quickly, just wanted to go over that line one more time because it's so important. Not only did he not mention that there were clothes folded inside the cabin, what does that tell you immediately? Also, he skipped over the fact that the iron mesh would have made it impossible to enter the chimney from the roof. That is huge. So this medical examiner is just, I mean,
making shit up, basically.
Yeah.
Well, it's like the Santa Claus style, you know, going down the chimney doesn't make any sense with the mesh grate that they had there.
And we know that it was still there, which there is some debate, you could say, over whether or not the mesh insert was at the top of the chimney. Born, of course, says that it wasn't there because it doesn't align with his story for it to be there. But Chuck says that it was. And, you know, he claimed that it was when his workers were there, they saw it and everything.
Yep.
Well, I would assume that the grate could be removed. The mesh could be removed because if you think about cleaning the chimney, right, they would need to be able to clean the chimney out. So I don't know this as fact, but I would assume that it could have been removed and put back at some point. So it doesn't completely rule out 100% that he didn't go down the chimney Santa Claus style. But these are, I mean, to look over such big pieces of evidence like this from an investigative standpoint is just alarming. I mean, the clothes thing is huge.
Well, it still goes back to the fact that if they had taken the time and not demolished that cabin, they could have gotten photos and seen how it actually was. We could determine what was there and we wouldn't have to take anyone's word for it.
Yeah, but they didn't, and now the cabin's gone.
Yeah.
So it seemed to be the MO for the Woodland Park Police Department to take the easiest answer. When Lucas White disappeared in 2004, his mother went to the police and said that she knew who had taken her son. But the police said that without a body, they didn't have any evidence.
So that's where you go find the evidence.
Yes. And get this. In Josh's case, the police said the exact opposite. While they did have a body, the scene had been so disturbed over the years by animals and contractors that it would have been useless to name a suspect.
So which is it, guys?
Right. On October 3rd, 2015, Chuck and Born met in person to discuss their findings. Chuck told Born that his theory didn't make sense when considering how the chimney was constructed. Now, they debated for several hours until they realized they just couldn't convince each other and were not able to come to any sort of agreement, so they decided that they were going to go to the media. And Chuck told the media about the iron grate that would have prevented Josh from climbing down the chimney. He also said that his clothes were folded inside the cabin, indicating he entered the chimney from inside the cabin. He also told reporters that the breakfast bar was ripped from the wall and used to cover up the fireplace. And again, he couldn't remember when it was moved, but in his mind, one thing was for sure. Josh did not get into the chimney from the top.
Yeah, and I mean, who really knows at the end of the day, right? But Chuck has no, you say like stake in the game.
Yeah, why
Like,
would he be?
Why would he make anything up? And he seems very confident that that grate couldn't be moved, that it would have prevented him from even getting into the chimney at all. And we would be able to know more details about the grate if it wasn't just demolished and tossed out like trash, which is insane.
Well, think about this for a second. So if Josh, in fact, tried to climb up the chimney, why would he have done that? Because I assume you could probably see the grate above you. So why on earth would he go up that? Like, because in my mind, I'm like, maybe, he just was like, let me see if I can climb up through the chimney and, reach the roof, which I've never heard of anybody wanting to do that.
Yeah.
But it just makes absolutely no sense why he would even, be in the chimney in the first place. Makes no sense.
Well, that's the big question. Why was he in the chimney?
Now, Born claimed that investigators did not know about the iron mesh as the contractors had already separated and moved it along with all the metal pieces of the demolished cabin. Born said that none of his investigators saw the iron mesh, didn't have photos of it, and suggested sarcastically that it might have, quote, disappeared.
LOL.
Haha, funny, just disappeared. He explained that the chimney sweep may have removed it years earlier without Chuck's knowledge, or that it may have just rusted away. But regardless, he felt that Josh had to have entered from the top and doubted Chuck's explanation entirely. But Chuck also told the media that Josh was found mainly naked, with his clothes folded neatly inside the cabin. And why would Josh undress, then exit the cabin, attempt to go back inside through the chimney?
Yeah.
You're going to undress, leave, and then go in the chimney.
Makes zero sense.
Especially when he would have known that the breakfast bar blocked his exit. Born responded with, quote, "This one really taxed our brains. We found his clothes just outside the firebox. He only had on a thermal t-shirt. We don't know why he took his clothes off, took his shoes and socks off, and why he went outside, climbed on the roof, and went down the chimney. It was not linear thinking. It's a real puzzle."
A theory for the clothes being there is he took them off to try to fit in the chimney. So I think based on all of the evidence and the circumstances, it seems like there was a reason, we don't know why, that Josh decided to go into the chimney, whether on his own accord or somebody forced him into the chimney. But one idea is that he took clothes off because he was worried about his clothes catching or not being small enough to go into the opening, or somebody else took his clothes off so that he could go into the chimney. It's just one possibility.
Yeah, we'll go over a couple other possibilities and theories later on.
I don't know. Looking at the pictures, though, of the chimney, it's only a picture, so you can't really tell, but it looks pretty wide.
Yeah, it's definitely hard to tell. I don't know. Yeah, pictures can be deceiving, though.
Yeah. Just like the one of the front of it from the outside, though, it looks like it, I don't know.
Yeah, it'd be nice if we actually had any data on it or, anything. So just like the police, Born wanted to go with the easy answer in all circumstances. So he suspected that drugs were to blame. But the state of Josh's body and the fact that it had been cremated made it impossible to test for drugs that could have been in his system. Maddux family maintained that Josh did not use any illegal drugs. Chuck kept saying that Josh did not go down the chimney and that he maybe was even put in there. He suspected that Josh was either led inside the chimney and then trapped once the person blocked off the fireplace with the breakfast bar, which makes total sense to me, or that he was murdered before and then hidden inside the chimney, which also could make sense. After Chuck made his statement to the media, Born simply did not have any answers to many parts of his story. For one, he could not account for the breakfast bar, and the most ridiculous was why Josh would ever just get naked and attempt to get inside the chimney from the roof. I mean, what is your explanation for this?
I guess, and like Josh, unless he's trying to allow himself to fit.
But it's like, but why go in there at all? It's the stuff that just keeps me up at night. I'm so curious. It's really frustrating. But Born still said that there was no evidence of foul play. He said there was no signs of trauma on the soft tissue, no broken bones, no knife marks, and no bullet holes. He even said that the soot in the fireplace did not indicate a struggle, which is a really stupid thing to say because Josh had been missing for 7 years and likely died the first day he left home. The soot in the fireplace couldn't indicate anything really because he was discovered during the demolition. Signs of trauma like strangulation are not apparent on skeletal remains, so it would have been irresponsible to just rule out homicide. And while Born could not conclusively settle on an official cause of death, he did list that Josh's case was an accidental death, which would cease any further investigation. This case was closed without any suspected foul play, mind-blowing, and the police said that this was Born's case, not theirs.
We see so many cases where things are just closed and like, oh, we don't suspect foul play.
Yeah.
This is definitely one of the weirdest circumstances of finding a body in a chimney.
And then just being like, oh yeah, nothing.
And you still are like, nope, not foul play.
Yeah, it's really lazy police work. And for them to actually make a statement saying this is the medical examiner's case, not theirs.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
I know. It's ridiculous.
Especially when you consider the fact that the police could have pressured Born to reopen the case. But again, this was the easy answer. They can just kind of, dust off their hands and move on, especially since it's been so long. And the cops wanted to focus on newer cases. Still, Murphy's theories sparked a response from Woodland Park locals who had called the police since 2008 with tips alleging that one man had bragged about killing Josh, his friend, Andrew Newman.
Have you heard that the flavored air category is quickly becoming the leading alternative to vaping and smoking? It's a whole new movement towards better habits led by the sponsor of today's episode, Fume. Fume is an award-winning flavored air device. Flavored air isn't like vaping. If vapor was compared to sticky soda, Fume cores are closer to herbal teas. Fume has tons of delicious flavors to choose from, like crisp mint and orange vanilla, and they just came out with some new ones that I'm totally digging, like cinnamon hearts and spearmint ice. With flavored air, you can satisfy that oral fixation through a passive diffusion system that utilizes no electronics, vapor, or combustion. I've been using the Fume device for the past couple weeks, and I can definitely confirm that it does take care of that oral fixation habit that I have. I've been digging the flavors, and I love that I don't have to charge it up. There's no batteries with this device. It's well made. It's made out of wood and metal. And I love that it has this little slide mechanism to it that you can slide back and forth with your hand. So not only do you get the oral fixation, but you get the fidgeting fixation as well. I've been loving the Fume cinnamon hearts cores and the spearmint ice cores, but they also have some other fun flavors to try as well, like orange vanilla, which is a great one to start with, maple pepper, which is very interesting, and raspberry lemon, which is awesome. Fume is really easy to use. It's portable, goes everywhere with you. And a lot of times people ask, what is that? Because, it doesn't have any vapor coming out of it, has no nicotine and non-toxic flavors. So it's a true guilt-free alternative. When you breathe in through the Fume device, you get hit with those aromas and flavors right in your mouth, which is absolutely game-changing. It really brightens your day when you get the burst of fresh mint in the morning. Fume continuously invests in third-party studies to ensure the safety of their products, and Fume is backed by doctors in the U.S. as well. Fume has served over 300,000 customers, and you'll be the next success story. For a limited time, you can use our code MileHigher to get a free gift with the Journey Pack. Head to tryfume.com, that's tryfum.com, and use our code MileHigher to get a free gift with your order today.
So Andrew Newman was one of Josh's friends in high school, and though Andrew was 2 years older than Josh, the two of them formed a band during Josh's senior year and spent a lot of time together. Andrew was a very transient person and hopped trains across the country, and Josh really admired this about him. I mean, he was a free-spirited type of person too, and the two of them actually planned to travel to New Mexico together after Josh's graduation. Many of Josh's friends even thought that's where he was when he first disappeared, since Andrew had been seen in New Mexico not long after Josh's disappearance. But Andrew also had a lot of trouble with the law. In the years following Josh's disappearance, he was in prison in Texas. He potentially killed 2 people in New Mexico and had burglary warrants issued against him in Seattle and Portland. Many Woodland Park locals thought that they saw Andrew with Josh the day he disappeared, and some even claimed that Andrew bragged about killing him. Again, the cops did absolutely nothing with this information. That's really the most frustrating of everything we see, is where they are handed evidence and leads on a silver platter, and they're like, oh,
nope, sorry,
throw that.
Yeah.
It's just, it's maddening. It really is.
The fact that some claim he bragged about killing him.
Yeah. Yep. No, not anything we're going to look into. Not enough evidence. Moving along. Case closed.
Well, it's a classic example of, a major part of our justice system that needs fixed, where the coroner is like, I ruled it this, and the police are then being like, well, we can't do anything because the coroner said it's undetermined or whatever.
Yeah,
and
we
so
need more like checks and balances there.
Yeah, it's a shame that police aren't more interested in finding out the truth as opposed to just closing cases.
And that's, of course, not always the case. I always feel the need to say this. We know that there are great police out there, great police departments. It's really unfortunate when something like this happens in a jurisdiction where it seems they just do not care. And you wonder what would have happened if this was somewhere else where they potentially would have actually followed through. Would this have been a solved case by now?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. But unfortunately, I think this is the case for a lot of places in America.
It is.
That police just don't care.
Well, we know that for a fact. We cover most of the cases we cover. We see this type of thing.
It's such a theme. That's why every week I don't know, every time I read a case, I'm just like, oh, of course.
Yep.
Well, to be fair, I think it's not always that the police don't care. It's that they just don't have the experience, right?
Or the resources.
Or resources. And Woodland Park's a very small town. And so, they probably don't have that many officers or detectives. So there's a possibility that maybe they could have went and did more, but they're overloaded with cases and,
but they had the CBI involved.
Yeah.
Right. The CBI could have done more.
Because Woodland Park, I just looked it up, is in 2022 had a population of 8,000. So very tiny, but still.
Yeah, and you can argue lack of resources, but I mean, how many resources does it take to just follow up on a lead like that? That's coming from multiple people.
At least talk to the guy.
At least
sit down and talk to him.
Yeah. Or at least talk to the people who are calling in with these tips. See what else they know. Explore it a little bit further. I mean, it's not anything that's...
This is your job.
Right. This is your job. So eventually the local media starts reporting on these tips regarding Andrew Newman, and Born said, quote, "There is a lot of hearsay that this person was the last to see him and that kind of thing," just totally belittling it. "They can't give me times, can't give me specifics, and we can't generate stuff that goes back 7 years. Well, maybe if you had listened in the beginning, you could have." But only a few months after the police closed their investigation, an anonymous Reddit user posted a lengthy description of why he believed Andrew was the one who killed Josh. The user claimed to have been close friends with Josh and knew Andrew, and the post began with, quote, "I went to high school with this skinny, dorky, hippie kid named Andy who played guitar in a band. I was never good friends with him or anything, but a year or so after I graduated, one of my good friends, Josh, started hanging out with him and then went missing. Last I heard, Andy was telling another friend, yeah, me and Josh have been spending a lot of time together. We're planning a trip to New Mexico." Now, obviously, this is coming from an anonymous Reddit user, so take it somewhat with a grain of salt. But yeah, when there's not much else to work with, you might as well kind of look into things like this.
Yep. And Andy had told many people in town that he and Josh had planned a trip to New Mexico. Before Josh's disappearance, this wasn't out of the ordinary. I mean, Andy often hopped trains, like we said, to other states before coming home to Woodland Park. And of course, Josh had always told his family how much he wanted to go on a big adventure. Andy had been to New Mexico before, and Josh thought he would be a good guide. A year after Josh's disappearance, Andy had gotten into some legal trouble in New Mexico, and the Reddit post continues, quote, "Turns out that in addition to becoming a lot scarier looking, Andy had indeed headed down to New Mexico, where he found himself shooting the shit with the caretaker of a disabled guy and got invited over to their apartment." This part of the story is actually confirmed. Andrew was in New Mexico shortly after Josh's disappearance and befriended a man named James Walito. James lived in Albuquerque and cared for Anthony Schneider, a disabled man who lived with James. So James and Andrew became drinking buddies, and Andrew remained transient and continued to hop trains between cities and states. But James let him crash on his couch whenever he returned to Albuquerque over the next year. And on May 2nd, 2009, almost a year after Josh first disappeared, Andrew was drinking with James and Anthony in their apartment. And at some point, James got up to take a shower. While James was in the shower, something flipped inside Andrew, and he grabbed a knife and stabbed Anthony Schneider to death. Andrew immediately fled the scene. He not only left behind the knife he used to kill Anthony, but multiple documents with his name on them that proved that he was there. There was no attempt to cover up the murder. Then, only a few weeks later in June, Andrew was seen wandering around Houston, Texas, and police stopped Andrew after he attempted to hitchhike, but the cops let him off with a warning. A few days later, Andrew was in a suburb of Houston, wandering from house to house, asking for water. And in June of 2009, the temperatures reached as high as 105 degrees, and it's unlikely that Andrew had eaten or drank much those days. So eventually, two teenagers actually let him into their house. He was asking for water, and they were like, yeah, you can have some. So they bring him in, and then immediately they go ahead and call their parents.
Thank God.
Yeah, I know, right?
So scary.
And then the father arrives, and he asked Andrew if he had anywhere to go, and Andrew was basically like, no, I just want to travel. And so the father was like, okay, no problem. Let me go ahead and take you to the next county. But
we can arrange that, traveling.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Well, in reality, thank God for the father, he was actually driving Andrew straight to the sheriff's station. And at the station, police took his fingerprints and linked him to a warrant in Seattle after he skipped town on bail for burglary and the stabbing of Anthony Schneider in New Mexico. On September 9, 2009, Andrew's court-appointed attorney pleaded not guilty on his behalf. Whether purposely or not, Andrew was in really bad shape in court. He kept interrupting his attorney, was dozing off and having outbursts of complete gibberish. The judge said, quote, "Based upon the fact that he cannot fully understand what we're going to do this morning, I will enter a plea of not guilty on his behalf." And just a few days later, on September 12th, Andrew attempted to escape from jail. And those charges were added to the murder charges.
Nice, dude.
Yeah, really great. On May 6, 2010, Andrew was sent to the New Mexico Behavioral Health Institute in Las Vegas, New Mexico, not to get confused with Las Vegas, Nevada. And it was here that Andrew confessed to also murdering a woman in Taos before he stuffed her inside a barrel. A woman who had been missing since 2007 was found stuffed inside of a trash can near Taos, New Mexico, and her name was Gladys Garcia. An unknown suspect was already in custody, but police attempted to connect it to the Bone Collector, who is an unconfirmed serial killer who could have killed at least 11 women in the desert near the West Mesa of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Even though Andrew had confessed to killing Gladys, the police didn't do anything with this new information. Andrew was already on trial for murder, and they already had a suspect in custody for Gladys's death. And basically, it would have just meant extra work for them.
Yeah, which
so like,
they don't love that. So
they're not a fan.
But then in early May of 2011, James Walito was actually killed during a bar fight in Albuquerque. And on May 12th, the prosecution dropped their case against Andrew without prejudice as their sole witness had died. Andrew was then released from prison and went back on the run. The police never investigated Andrew for the murder of Gladys Garcia, and it is unknown if the suspect that they did have in custody was found guilty. Even though New Mexican media coverage focused on the Bone Collector killings, many who knew Andrew back in Woodland Park paid attention to his legal issues down south. And when the news of Andrew's arrest first went online, anonymous commenters said, quote, "We went to high school together, and myself as well as many of my friends have kept in contact with him as recently of June of this year." But news of Andrew's arrest, trial, and eventual release also reignited interest in Joshua Maddux's disappearance. And at this point, it's important to note he had not been found. The anonymous Reddit post went on to say, quote, "Several of us went to the cops saying, 'Yo, Josh who went missing was last seen with Andy, who's a murderer. Maybe you should check that out.' Despite a fair amount of pestering, nothing ever really came out of it. And by nothing, I mean that the police mostly didn't even return our calls. and once accidentally canceled the bulletin on Josh because he's, quote, alive and well living in the next town over. And he wasn't. Except for the fact that in addition to Josh having been last seen with Andy immediately before his stabbing spree, people called in to report having heard rumors that Andy was bragging about having to put, quote, Josh in a hole. The Pikes Peak Courier also confirmed that they had received tips since Josh's disappearance of a man who bragged about having killed him. The Reddit post ended by saying, quote, it's not that I want somebody to blame. I wish they would have done some police shit, don't we all? Open investigation, try to track down some leads, interview some of the folks who have been calling in tips for the last 7 years. I don't know, don't just say accidental and dust off your hands and call it a day. And after locals pressured the coroner, Al Born, to look at Andrew Newman, he said, I know it's not a natural death, and I'm confident it's not a suicide. My other options are accidental death, homicide, and undetermined cause of death. It's frustrating we can't pin it down. Yeah, I'll say. I mean, you're the one who is supposed to pin it down, right? But again, since Born had ruled Joshua's death accidental and closed the case, cops couldn't further investigate. Of course, they could pressure Born to reopen the case, but they were content since the case was so old and a physical investigation would present challenges for a police force happy to have a closed case. To this day, authorities have never considered Andrew Newman a suspect in the death of Joshua Maddux, which is just, my God. So Andrew Newman has kept pretty busy since Joshua's body was found in 2015. On April 27th, 2017, he was arrested in New Jersey on contempt charges. In December 2018, he was arrested in Texas when cops found that he had skipped town after a burglary warrant was issued to him in Florida. While incarcerated in Texas, Andrew assaulted 3 police officers in 2019. And while it's unclear if he has been released from prison in Texas yet, his current address is still listed in Woodland Park. His whereabouts are unknown otherwise. Now, Coroner Born swapped positions with his deputy in 2019, though he is not currently involved with the Teller County Coroner's Office. We can't even confirm if he's still alive at this point, but Chuck Murphy is still alive. At 88, he still runs Murphy Construction and renovates Colorado Springs historic buildings. In 2018, the city honored him with a Lifetime Achievement Award, and he still believes Josh's death involved foul play, as I think most of us probably do. The Maddux family has maintained a low profile since the investigation was closed, and in Kate's last public statement to the Denver Post, she said, quote, we'll never really know what happened to him. It's a horror story in my mind to imagine what my brother must have gone through. Cannot even imagine the things that must go through your mind. It's been very awful. It was a nightmare that I wouldn't wish on anyone. While the Maddux family wants answers to Josh's death, the fact that they have finally been able to bury him has, brought them a lot of peace, and I totally understand that. While the case is officially closed and unlikely to be reopened, we do not know what happened to Joshua Maddux that chilly morning in May of 2008.
Andrew Newman does seem to be the most likely culprit, and if his own words are to be believed, he has killed people before and hidden them in strange locations. However, those online have presented numerous other theories about what happened to Josh. Of course, there's the official accidental death ruling, which stated that Josh entered the cabin, took off his clothes, and went back outside to climb down the chimney. This is very ridiculous without something else that compelled him to do so. I mean, I don't think he would just choose to do that one day.
It sounds so outrageous, especially when you read it like that.
Literally.
Like, really? Really? That's the official ruling?
Yep.
Entered
the cabin, took off his clothes, went back outside, climbed down the chimney. Al Born suggested drugs during his official ruling, but couldn't confirm because the body was too decomposed to test reliably. Josh's family has also said that he never did illegal drugs or lived that kind of lifestyle like we had mentioned, but Andrew definitely did enjoy drugs. And if they had been together when Josh disappeared, it's definitely possible that Andrew could have given him something that was too strong, and maybe Josh started to freak out, and then that caused him to undress and eventually climb into the chimney, and then he got stuck. I guess
it makes a little more sense.
Yeah.
But
I don't know. I think that's a stretch, though.
I agree.
Well, I think it's a possibility because I was looking at the report that was put out from Andrew's most recent arrest, and they were using PCP when they got pulled over and they were in possession of PCP. If you're not familiar with PCP, that is a very, very strong drug that could make you do all kinds of crazy things, gives you super strength. I mean, it's like they were fighting. It took like 4 police officers to get these guys under control. They had to mace them. Like there's a huge fight to just get them into custody because they're under the influence of PCP. So I do think it's possible if PCP was involved that potentially it could have led to him doing this, but I'm not saying that for sure, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely interesting to know. I didn't realize that he had been caught with PCP before. And obviously, my mind initially goes to, I don't think Joshua would have just taken PCP. That's a pretty big jump from someone who's not known to have experimented with drugs a lot to suddenly take that. But of course, there's the possibility that he was forced to take something like that, which definitely changes things. And it's interesting, Josh, that you bring up the super strength thing, because if PCP was involved, it could explain how the breakfast bar, which is super heavy, was removed from the wall and then covered the fireplace to keep Josh hidden.
Exactly. It's a possibility that I don't think you can completely rule out.
Yeah. Once you say that, I didn't really think about PCP. That is a whole another ballgame. Yeah, for sure.
It's very clear from Andrew's rap sheet that this guy is a career criminal and he's just wreaking havoc across the entire country. And he's probably dealing with mental illness at this point as well. So you couple that with these super potent drugs that are completely taking you out of reality and changing your whole demeanor. And I mean, it's very possible that if that was what was involved in this whole ordeal with Josh, that it does kind of make a little bit of sense. But again, we don't know for sure because they never did a toxicology report. So
yep.
And of course, Josh was still mourning the loss of his brother Zachary. Well, I think this is pretty unlikely.
Yeah, I agree.
Josh did live 2 years after his brother's death, without any incidents as far as we're aware of. Perhaps his upcoming graduation brought up feelings he had, kind of kept hidden since Zachary died. And while it's safe to say that Josh wouldn't intentionally commit suicide by climbing into the chimney, maybe he went to the cabin alone to, kind of clear his thoughts. And with it being so close to his home, less than a mile, maybe he just went, didn't tell anyone he was going, and figured he would come back. But of course, the temperatures that night ended up dropping into the low 20s, which could have induced hypothermia if Josh had stayed, in the rundown cabin for too long. Now, paradoxal undressing is a phenomenon that occurs during the end stages of hypothermia. And this is basically where a person suffering starts to feel actually really hot.
Yeah, it's super weird.
Yeah. And they have this desire to undress, essentially.
Well, you also become like sort of disoriented,
oh, yeah, absolutely.
By that point too.
Yeah. And then there's also something called terminal burrowing, which often occurs in tandem. This is basically where the person suffering from hypothermia needs to burrow into small spaces to keep warm. So perhaps Josh was delirious from the hypothermia and then undressed because he was feeling too hot.
Yeah.
And then climbed into the chimney because it was obviously a closed space. And then he got stuck and died of the exposure.
I'm sure you two both agree with me that that's very, very unlikely.
Yeah.
Maybe if this was a cabin completely secluded, he's stuck there. He has nowhere else to go, no way to get out of this situation. But he's down the street from his house pretty much. If he was getting cold to the point where he's starting to experience hypothermia, I think he would leave. I'm pretty sure everyone can agree with that.
That's my thing. If he had succumbed to hypothermia, I would guess that he would, in his mind, go, okay, I'm getting really cold. I need to go home, start walking home. And even if he didn't make it all the way home, and was found in the woods somewhere, but to just stay in the cabin.
Yeah, no.
Especially knowing, he's familiar with this area and it's so close to his home.
Yeah.
It just doesn't
I can see why
sense.
the theory is brought up and it would make sense in different circumstances, but I think here it just does not fit.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion though. I don't know. There's also one thing that I just can't shake, and that's that Chuck said that he and his workers barely paid attention to the cabin once it was abandoned, but he still did enter it a few times before the demolition. He and his workers noticed the smell, but why didn't they see Josh's folded clothes if they had found his body? Regardless, it's doubtful that Josh was alone when he died in the cabin. I mean, I think everyone can agree with that. Otherwise, he would have just returned home before things, had gotten that bad. While Andrew could have killed him in a fit of random rage, just the way that he did to Anthony Schneider, and then hid him in the chimney, he also could have been involved in other ways. Aside from the drug theories, and this one really makes a lot of sense to me, perhaps the chimney was part of some sort of hazing ritual. Now, we have talked a lot about hazing, I think mainly or only with fraternities.
Yeah.
We haven't really gotten into like sports teams or stuff like that, but this one kind of makes sense. I mean, Andrew is someone that he had looked up to.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible that he took advantage of that and told him that this would be some type of funny joke, or in order to travel with me to New Mexico or to be in a band? I don't know, but I feel like maybe he was convinced to do this and got stuck.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see it. I think because, again, like, why would you willingly go in there?
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about this earlier. I think that it would be very weird if Josh had already passed and then he was placed in the chimney. I think that's very strange. So it does seem like perhaps somehow he, quote unquote, like willingly went in there, as in like, okay, I'll go in here to try and prove to this guy that I'm worthy of going on the trip or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then maybe Andrew then covered it and was like, oh, this is a funny joke or something. Somewhere something went wrong and he ended up dying.
Or he's that demented that he's like, I'll actually kill him by blocking him in.
Yeah, that's a whole other. I didn't even really think about that. Yeah.
Or the hazing thing can also, kind of make sense of the, stripping off the clothes, which is often something that we see in hazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really struggle with the hazing one, to be honest with you, because I'm just like, why? Why would he be hazing him, and for what reason, right? Like, unless there's something that we don't know about, I'd be interested to know more about their relationship and how well they actually knew each other, past experiences they had together. Because to me, I don't know, like, Josh just seems like somebody who would not do that. Like, he just like, would any of you do that? Like, who would do that? Who would get into a chimney for a hazing ritual?
Well, I certainly don't want to say that he seemed like the type that would do that. It's just it happens to a lot of people. Peer pressure can be really intense, especially when you're young. He's just about to graduate high school. We see tons of people that get hazed. You would think I would never do something like that, but we're in that type of situation and you're pressured. I'm not saying 100% that's what happened, obviously, but I feel like it could be a possibility.
Yeah, I'm not saying rule it out completely, but my thing is that scenario to me only makes sense if substances were involved potentially.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's such a weird, random place to do this, right? In the first place, this abandoned cabin and a chimney, like, that's not a thing that happens that often, right? It's not like this well-known hazing ritual to make somebody climb up up inside of a chimney. Like, I don't know, just doesn't make sense to me.
Mm-hmm. It's such a bizarre situation. Your mind goes all over the place. What about the idea that Andrew had killed him and then put his body in the chimney afterwards?
That is just a lot of work.
Yeah, kind of. Or I guess, getting a body up, because he would have had to have put him in from the top, right? Especially if he was,
I would assume.
Yeah, especially because he was facing down.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. That one's tough too.
Like, and you're in the middle of the woods. Why wouldn't you just leave him somewhere in the middle of the woods?
And of course, we don't have much understanding because they didn't do a good job of preserving or really investigating. But it seems from what we do know that it looked as if he had gotten stuck. Not that he was placed there afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we can't rule that out. I don't know.
Maybe they were together just like goofing off and he dared him to, or they were like doing, I don't know, weird dares.
It just, with everything else we know about Andrew, doesn't really seem like he was a goofy kind of guy who's just I mean, chances are he, I don't know. I think this was malicious. I don't think it was an accident.
Do you think that?
But again, I do have to say, sorry, just real quick. We don't know for sure that Andrew was involved.
Well, yeah, of course.
Going over that, but I don't know.
It makes me think maybe Andrew, if he was involved, maybe it wasn't his motive from the start to end his life, Josh's life, but it could have, something something went haywire, whether that was they were tripping on drugs or whatever, and then he freaked out and was like, oh God, I gotta get rid of the evidence quick. But again, why would you put him in a chimney?
Yeah.
Because he's not in his right state of mind. I think it's very obvious that if you just look at his history and his behavior and, the crimes that follow this, I think it's very possible he just snapped and killed Josh for whatever reason. And then because of the state of mind he was in that moment, I don't think this was like a planned out, premeditated type of thing. I think it was just, it happened in that moment, something went wrong. And the most logical thing for him to do is just to hide them right where they were. And so that's how he ends up in the chimney. And I believe there's probably some type of substance involved, at least on Andrew's part, which makes sense for the breakfast bar being moved. But
see, I keep going back to Anthony and thinking about that if Andrew really was involved, I think it was purposeful. Maybe it was a spur of the moment type thing, like he snapped just in the same way that he did with Anthony. But I don't think I just don't think he's the type of guy that would just accidentally do this. I think his character really speaks for himself.
So you think if he was involved, he had the intention of killing him and putting him there, like had planned this whole thing out?
I mean, I really don't know anything at the end of the day. There's not one theory that just really hits home for me. But yeah, that would make more sense to me when you look at this guy's history and the type of person that he is. I do think it's interesting because at first I was like, I doubt it was drug related. But I don't know, when you bring up the PCP thing, that does make a lot of sense.
And I bet you if we went back into his history, even into high school, and I'm sure there's drug use set going back years and years and years, and who knows, I mean, what the extent of that is. And so you couple that with somebody like this and potentially mental illness, you're going to get a lot of crazy things that happen. I mean, just if you go look at Andrew's rap sheet, you read the reports of his arrest. This guy is out of his mind, fighting with police. They're tasing him. They're macing him.
He's escaping
on
jail.
the run. He's jumping trains. He's on one side of the country, then the other side of the country. I mean, this guy is completely erratic and out of control. So, and he's probably been this way for a long, long time. So maybe this was the first kind of time he snapped and had this crazy, incident occur. But I don't know. I mean, if he was there, it seems very likely that this is what happened. But if you remove him completely from the situation and disregard what people have said and witnesses have reported, then it's a whole different ballgame, right? Then it's really a mystery.
Yeah. And it's a mystery we may never have the answers to unless Andrew one day confesses. But who knows if he even has recollection of it at this point.
Well, yeah.
Whatever, do that. But yeah, what do you guys think about the idea that he was alone? How do you think this could have happened if no one else was there?
My only thoughts on that is, he kept talking about he wanted to go on this adventure and was kind of free-spirited. And it seemed like he was somewhat of maybe a risk taker or wasn't afraid to, try new things. And
yeah, it's fair to say, yeah.
Was he there and just thought that maybe this would be like a fun challenge or something and wanted to see if he could do it?
Yeah. Just like, who sees that as a fun challenge?
This is really out there, but like maybe he was trying to prepare for some type of like going into a cave or something, and this was his way of trying to prep for it.
Yeah, I don't know. I see what you mean. That is very out there.
Yeah,
probably very unlikely, but an interesting thought. I've kind of thought too, what if there was he's such a kind, wonderful, spirited person. What if there was like an animal stuck in there and he was trying to help?
That's a good point, actually.
Possibly.
Yeah.
I was going to jump in and say, I think Janelle has a point there because there's a huge group of people out there who just seek adrenaline. They want to explore. There's so many channels on YouTube that are about exploring abandoned places. And it's interesting that we're covering this case because just recently, in the last day or two, there was a group of teenagers out in Deer Trail, Colorado, that went into an abandoned missile silo and fell in.
Oh my
I saw
God.
Did you guys see that?
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, crazy.
Did they
and it
die?
took it was like in the middle of the night, and it took the first responders hours and hours and hours to get them out. They did get them out, but I believe one of them is in like critical condition.
Jesus.
And hearing the first responders talking about just how crazy that was and how dark, like, and scary it was in there, but it just showed, and they were 18 years old. They're like a bunch of 17, 18-year-olds who went in there, and they know they're not supposed to go in there. But I think there is, and I know for me personally, I was definitely like into like adrenaline seeking things at that age, that I wouldn't put it past somebody who's into that thing to potentially try something like this. I had plenty of friends who did all sorts of daredevil stuff. So it's possible that he just was out on his own, trying to enjoy himself, and just ran past, went into the cabin, was like, oh, that'd be interesting if I could climb up through it. And it is as simple as that. He took his clothes off so that he could try to fit up through the fireplace. And maybe that's what he tried. Again, it doesn't really explain the grate being in there and all of that. So there's still a lot of like, but again, I think there's something missing from this case. There's a major piece of evidence. There's a major part of the story that we don't know, because they had started demolishing it, and his body moved, and who knows what other evidence was destroyed as they were starting to demolish the cabin.
And just over time, weather and everything else.
I mean, there's so much that we don't know.
I don't know. That theory, I struggle with that, because I see your point, and I understand, especially when you're young, I think we were all kind of adrenaline. I used to climb through storm drains. I don't know why I was doing that. But anyway, I can see that. But I think oftentimes when those types of things happen, it's with other kids around you that are encouraging you. It's very unlikely to me that he would just want to do this on his own.
Maybe he
Plus,
wasn't
it's
alone.
a chimney versus a cave or where would the
missile silo,
something like that. I can understand more than just this random abandoned chimney. Like, what is there to see? What is there?
Well,
why?
Like Josh said, it's a very common thing to go and explore abandoned locations, and it's kind of like this.
I guess.
You're not supposed to be there, but it's interesting, and can you find anything and whatever. And not saying that this will happen, but I think that whole idea of going to explore abandoned things is more common than maybe it seems like it would be.
I don't know. It's really tough. I think in my gut, which, what do I really know? I never met Joshua. I think I don't know. None of that really makes that much sense to me. I really do believe that Andrew was somehow involved in this. I honestly, Josh, after you explained it, the PCP thing really does make the most sense to me.
But like, that is, it makes sense if there was proof that there was, that is like such a stretch. He was caught with PCP one time.
True. That is true. And it's way later on.
Yeah, it's way later on. Like, how are we supposed to be like, oh yeah.
I just think it's the moving of the bar to me that I'm like, I don't know.
Well, a lot of people are also like salvagers and try and go into abandoned places and get like medals and stuff like that. So it might have not even been related to this, that the bar was moved.
I know we have brought up the idea too of workers at some point covering the fireplace because of the smell, trying to block it off, that it could have been way later on. But I don't know, man. In my gut, I feel like someone else was there. I don't know whether he was convinced or something happened to him and he was put there, but I think the bar was put there to keep him in, and that he was forced to take off his clothes. And who knows what else happened or why that was. I don't know. This one is so confusing, so tough. I'm really curious to hear what our listeners think, but I just feel so badly for this family.
So sad.
It's there's nothing worse than not only losing a family member, but having no answers as to what happened to them.
Losing two family members.
Yeah. I mean, what trauma they have been through. But their family has just been so amazing and graceful through all of this to really try to keep the focus on who Joshua was and try to move on, and how much peace they got from being able to bury him. I'm glad they had that, but it cannot be easy to live with this kind of unknown for the rest of your life. And I really think, unfortunately, we probably won't get these answers unless it really was Andrew and he decides to confess.
I don't see that happening.
Yeah, I don't, unfortunately, either. But you never know. guilt can really get to people. But
True.
that's if he was involved. We don't know that for sure. It seems very likely to me.
Yeah, I was just going to say, well, not to mention the fact that had they investigated this properly and they had found sufficient evidence to charge Andrew with the murder of Joshua, that it would have prevented this years-long criminal spree that Andrew went on after.
That's such a good point.
He likely would have been in prison with
Lives
a
could have been
hefty
saved.
sentence. Yeah, I mean, there could have been a lot of damage mitigated had they actually investigated this thoroughly, and they missed that opportunity and did what a lot of law enforcement agencies do in these types of cases, where they go with what they feel is the most obvious path and get tunnel vision, and then they end up missing things that are very important. So yeah, it's pretty sad.
I just keep going back to, it would be so hard to place someone there. Like it really makes me think that he would have had to go in there willingly on his own, because to shove a body up there in that position, that has got to be so
or to bring
difficult.
them out, carry them outside onto the roof, drop
That's
them from
even
the top.
more ridiculous. Well, I don't know which one's more either. Like, how do you get someone, quote unquote, Santa Claus style, so they're upside down, shove them up a chimney?
But people do crazy things.
That's like,
you can't rule it out.
Well, that's assuming he didn't have help either. We don't know. There could even be other people involved in this that we just don't even know at this point, because they never looked into it. So
yeah,
the possibilities are endless.
Imagine if they had searched for DNA.
Yeah, check his clothes for DNA.
Yeah,
foreign DNA.
Any of that. If they had just done anything would have been good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just really feel for this family. But that's going to be it for us today, you guys. We definitely want to hear from you. What theory makes most sense to you? But yeah, we will be back next week. But until then, keep on taking your mind a mile higher.